So again, welcome to the webinar here today, our Spring Forage webinar with Bart Lardner. My name is Alicia Sapatic and I'll be chairing the session today. It will be recorded and available afterwards. The presentation is scheduled to take approximately 3/4 of an hour, leaving time for questions and comments. You can type your questions into the chat box throughout the presentation and they will be handled throughout or else at the end of the presentation. If you're having difficulties with sound or would like the presenter to slow down, you can also communicate that through the question box. If your question box disappears during the presentation, there's an arrow on the top of your control panel that'll bring it back into view. A survey will be sent following the end of the webinar, so please take a moment to fill that out as it helps us plan future events as well. So like I said, our presenter here today is Dr. Bart Lardner. For the past 25 years, Bart has managed a research program focusing on beef cattle management and forage production research. Dr. Lardner is a professor in the Department of Animal and Poultry Science at the University of Saskatchewan, where he supervises students and teaches courses in forages and beef cattle nutrition. His expertise lies in pasture and water management and cow-calf systems, summer and winter grazing systems, and ruminant nutrition. His research program works closely with producers to ensure applicability of results back to the industry. So with that, go ahead, Bart, put your presentation into presenter mode and we'll get started with your presentation.
All right, can you hear me?
You betcha.
All right, and it's in slide mode or presentation mode? Good.
You're good to go.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Alicia, for that introduction and the invitation to speak about forages. Anytime we get a chance, we jump at it for sure. And this has been a very challenging year. You know, I've been swamped for the last 2.5 months with questions, quizzes, and all kinds of case scenarios. And given the fact that we're, you know, in a very difficult time, a very difficult year with low precipitation and high heat, certainly stretching out any of our forage resources is so key. And I'm just going to, you know, shed some light on some topics, some alternatives, some different species that you may or may not have thought of, and hopefully get you thinking and planning, maybe for what's left in our grazing season for 2021, if we can get any rainfall at all, or maybe for sure let's plan for spring of 2022. And I'm also very active on social media, so feel free to follow me. My program is very much an applied cow-calf and forage research program, and certainly we've been busy over the last 25 years working out of the Lanigan, Saskatchewan site at Tremenda Research Ranch, and done a multitude of research on annual and perennial forage species, just, you know, trying to extend the grazing season 300+ days a year. And so perennials for sure, but certainly what are all the options out there for annual forages, whether we're going to utilize them in spring, summer, fall, or maybe well into the winter time period. So in my mind, it's all about trying to grow that forage, the smorgasbord of varieties that are out there. Don't just put all your eggs in one basket. Look at the opportunities, the alternatives that might be for you and your farm or your ranch, whether you live in the southwest or whether you're up in the northeast or up in the Aspen Parkland. You really want to look at, you know, what's going to adapt to my area, my soil zone, what's going to persist, what's going to produce. And even in these very moisture limiting conditions, it's surprising what kind of gets us through. So I guess I go back to what is drought, and it's just around the corner. I know we've heard lots of conversations about previous dry years. 1988 was a bad one. I know we went through 2000, 2001 at Lanigan. It was just a tough year. We had to, you know, stretch out our pasture resources. The perennial pastures got hammered up pretty good, but basically 75% or less of your annual precip from April 1 to September 15. And, you know, rule of thumb, 50% reduction in annual precip. Well, we should be getting, as I said, I've been at Lanigan for 25 years, and now we're moving over to the Livestock Forage Center of Excellence at Clavet, Saskatchewan, and we should be getting about 10, 11, 12 inches throughout that April to September time period. And we're stretching about 3.5 right now. So you can imagine that, you know, it's very regional, this lack of rainfall. And so sometimes we rely on those spring soil levels, you know, coming out of that winter time period. But it's just very frustrating that some of those storms are missing you by, you know, 5 or 6 miles, and the neighbors are getting it all. So it's been very challenging, and we see a lot of hard decision making this year on, you know, sustaining the cow number. It's an individual farm to farm process, and you know, it's folks are trying to source their winter feed supply or their fall feed supply, being inventive, straw-based diets, alternate feeds, you know, salvage crops. We're talking lots about those, but they're really right now, and hay has gone through the roof from 3 to 12 cents a pound, and you know, we're really looking for alternative basal forage alternatives to just help us in this critical time period. And I guess what I'm suggesting today is that, from what I'm going to talk about, just consider all your options. And I know you're in a really difficult situation, and you know, this may be about 10 weeks too late, this conversation, but as I said, maybe it might stretch us into the fall. Maybe it might help us for what we're going to look at for 2022. So it's a planning process. There's lots of decisions to be made. We see a lot of prolonged drought. I know we're getting a little bit of, you know, rain right now. It's small, it's minor, it's like I said, 8 to 10 weeks too late. It's a very, very frustrating situation. So maybe we really are planning for next year. But yeah, gather all this information, whether it's this webinar or a multitude of webinars, BCRC webinars, your ministry folks, the Ag Knowledge Center. You just go out and you just gather all those resources and look at what's going to work for me on my operation wherever I live. And I guess when I'm going to talk about annual forages here this afternoon is that, do you have the ability to maybe, you know, establish annual forages somewhere on your farm or your ranch? Is there the opportunity, if you did have that land available, to maybe manage it, maybe utilize it with some fencing, you know, infrastructure to maybe manage utilization or control, you know, allocation of that forage to your animals? Again, water is right beside the lack of forage, the lack of rainfall, and our water points, our water quality also has been extremely challenging. But you know, you got to think about it. If you're going to seed that annual forage, where's the water going to be if I move my critters out there? And the ability to be flexible, the ability to manage and monitor, and the ability to adjust and hopefully have plan B in your pocket. All right, so I just want to maybe go through, you know, what are some of the opportunities of annual forages that are out there. You know, we do probably have other resources, our perennial forages, our tame seeded, as well as a lot of native rangeland. But you know, there's going to be some topics here in this webinar that may or may not work for you, but hopefully there might be something, or you might just pick one point out of today's conversation. So we talk about annual forages. I guess we separate them into different groups. First of all, our cool season annuals. You know, our options there are to maybe look at, do we look at a frost seed or a late fall seed, you know, in coming up in the next 2 to 3 weeks, or maybe we think about, is this something we're looking at to maybe seed late spring or summer of 2022? So there's a couple options out there. And you know, sometimes there's some of these annual cereal crops can be really good options in times of limited rainfall. It's surprising the biomass that they will produce, you know, if you're only going to get that 2-3 inches of rain. You know, I guess we can look at our winter cereals as well, and I'll talk about those in more detail. But you know, maybe there's that option to put in that winter cereal in the spring just to produce basically vegetative growth for your grazing animals. And also I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done previously at Lanigan with Western Beef Development Center, continue to do here at Livestock Forage Center of Excellence. Just looking at all the different, annual forage alternatives that are coming down the road, and maybe we can do some research on them and give you folks some of the findings. So yeah, your idea is putting in that annual forage to stretch out the perennial resources, and then once you've seeded it, hopefully 6 weeks plus, you might get some biomass that might be suitable for grazing, and I'll talk about some of these other options that we might see some regrowth on or some carryover on. So that's the cool season annuals. There's the other option out there, the warm season annuals. These may or may not work. I know we've had a lot of 30+ days, and you may or may not get that 1/4 inch of rain. And so what are we talking about? We're talking about probably we're going to establish it that late spring, or maybe we're thinking we're going to have an opportunity with possibly some rainfall coming at us and some hot days to maybe do that seeding midsummer. But again, with these warm seasons, they do need that that 26 to 30 Celsius for adequate growing conditions. And again, possibly 6 to 7 weeks later, we might have some grazing. I think I see a lot of, in some of the warm seasons I'll talk about, they may be used for grazing, but maybe also for stockpile or for maybe stretching out that November, December, January swath graze time period. Okay, what am I talking about in terms of different categories of annual forages? As I said, the cool seasons, we're talking about the oats, the barley, the triticale, and the wheat. The warm seasons, we're talking the millets, and that's including the red proso, the foxtail, the golden German. Of course, sorghum is out there, and corn. I'm not going to talk about sorghum or corn here this afternoon. Corn conversation could be a whole webinar in itself, but I think I'm just going to talk about some of those warm season millets that we've done some work on, and that may or may not, provide an opportunity. We'll also touch on some of the cool season ryegrasses, they too, and we'll just talk about where they might be a better fit depending on where you live in the province. More in that parkland area, that black gray wooded area, and of course I will focus on the winter cereals. So the fall rye, the winter wheat, and the winter triticale is maybe an alternative or an option away from the oat or the barley. Okay, so forage oats, we've been growing them for many, many years at Lanigan. They've always, worked on average, worked quite well. Generally, you obviously are going to do a soil test and look at levels of NPK and S. Whether you throw in a little bit of N, whether that's an organic or inorganic source of fertilizer, is entirely up to the operation. But whether you're putting on 10 to 12 pounds of N or maybe a little bit higher, maybe that 40, 50, it depends. And, we all look like geniuses when we get that nice little shot of rain after we put those annual forages in. But forage oats, well suited to many different areas, generally good acceptability by the grazing livestock, generally pretty good yielding from what I've experienced over the years with the different varieties that we've looked at. Fairly good quality, right? Meeting the energy protein needs depending on the class of livestock, and fairly good digestibility with some of these new releases that are coming out from Saskatchewan and Alberta breeding programs. And generally, you put it in, you can go out there and hopefully utilize it 6-7 weeks post-seeding, at that suitable height, so that you're just not grazing it too soon, too quick, too often. Some of the varieties we've looked at over the years are the CDC Baylor. There's also that CDC Haymaker that's out there. And we've also looked at that other one, the Super Oat, the SO1, the high fat, low lignin. As we know, most of that opportunity is in the kernel itself. But in my mind, I was looking at, is this going to be a really suitable whole plant oat forage compared to some of our barleys, for example. So the Baylor oat we've done a lot of work with, and you can see the difference on the left is a is a more of a grain type oat versus on the right is the forage type oat. And you can see the very broad leaves of these forage cereals, and they're bred to produce that, good biomass on the structure without the seed. So we're talking the leaf, the stem, the culm, and so just providing good quality grazing for your cattle. Some of the forage barleys too are really good options, and we've looked at many of them over the years. They may be more drought tolerant, so to speak. I guess it depends on the variety. Certainly work with your local ag rep and your agribusiness to figure out what may or may not work for you, depending on where you live. If you're down in the south in the brown soil zones or the dark browns, versus up in the northeast corner where you see more of the black and the gray wooded soils, what forage barley might work better for me? We highly suggest you use the smooth on varieties if you're going to go down this road with the forage barley, just to get away from those awns and those abscesses in your grazing cattle and those lumpy jaws. And looking for, do we get one graze? Do we get two graze? And generally we see a pretty good first graze, and if we don't get a lot of rainfall after that, there's probably very little regrowth. So in most of these varieties, suggest you use certified seed, but there's a lot of common seed out there as well. And these are just some of the varieties we've looked at over the years. For example, Ranger's been around for a long time, and we've also evaluated Cowboy and Maverick, and I see there's a new one coming out of Alberta called Advantage. So obviously looking for a forage type barley if you're going to be seeding it to extend that grazing season for your cattle versus a grain type. Triticale is another interesting one. We've done some work on triticale here at the university, both at Western Beef and now at LFCE. It is a cross between wheat and rye and tends to be a fairly good performer on marginal land, tends to be higher yielding, and we've seen that on the work that we've done, producing more biomass compared to oat or barley, tends to be a little more drought tolerant. There is some challenges out there, I guess, in terms of acceptability or palatability. Do the critters like it better or worse than your oat or barley? And of course, it is very susceptible to ergot. And so in our trials, we certainly have done that testing every year just to be aware that it is a variety that is susceptible to that disease. And some of the varieties that we've looked at for extensive grazing are the bunker. And then of course there's, as I said, the smooth on the barley. And in terms of triticale varieties, there's that Taza out there, or the onletted variety. And we've done a couple of studies evaluating that. Now I want to get into the annual ryegrasses, which may not fit as good as an oat or a barley or a triticale. These are probably more up in that black soil zone, that gray wooded, the knock on wood, we may get a little more rainfall if and when we do get rainfall. But they, in an adequate precip year, they will work very well. And we've done a lot of work. Melfort did a lot of work, Dwayne McCartney, myself, and it does produce really good fall biomass for just background on those calves. There's a couple of types of annual ryegrasses. You can see these are some pictures of Maris Ledger at Weldon, Saskatchewan. And the first one is the Italian ryegrass, Maris Ledger, and it is good because it produces just vegetative growth. But again, it may not be one we'd look at in this fall with lack of rainfall, but maybe something to put in your back pocket, and let's look at it kind of a next year program. As I said, it is, as you can see, produces very lush, high quality forage for that August, September, October time period. The other annual ryegrass, other than Italian ryegrass, is the Vestivolds, which is a cross developed. Obviously, Italian ryegrass is out of Italy, and the Vestivolds come out of the Netherlands. But the problem with the obeyed Vestivolds is they do they do produce seed heads in the year of establishment. And so obviously, I would always suggest, if you're going to look at Italian ryegrass, or sorry, annual ryegrasses, I would go to the Italian versus the Westerwolds. Just an example of this is 2 years ago, we were looking at backgrounding a bunch of cattle at Lanigan. And, you know, I've always liked the Italian ryegrass, but we did put in Italian ryegrass, and we also put in fall rye. And we did have a really, really tough year for rainfall. And the fall rye won the foot race hands down. So, as I said, be aware that these do need adequate precipitation, but I do mention them. Okay, the winter cereals are really an opportunity in my mind, and we've evaluated them, we've grown them for many, many years at Lanigan, and we're continuing to evaluate them at Clavette, Saskatchewan, at LFCE. So the winter cereals do need that period of cold or vernalization before they will produce seed heads. Okay, so be aware of that. They can be frost tolerant. Generally, if you're going to spring seed, you'll get some pretty good early summer growth, about that 6 to 7, 8 weeks post seeding. Very lush, and that's just some steers grazing hazelnut fall rye out there at Tremundi 2 years ago, and they did very well on it. If you're going to go to the fall seed program, then for sure you're ahead of the game, trying to capture that fall moisture, that spring moisture, and get that early spring growth to just try and provide some forage resource for those cattle early in the year coming out of calving in that winter feeding program. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about fall rye, winter wheat, and winter triticale. And so the fall rye we've worked with for many, many years. I've grown Prima in many different studies. We've been looking at hazelnut for the last couple of years as a, you know, one that produces greater yield and, knock on wood, a little bit better quality than the Prima. Very hardy. And as I said, spring seed will give you vegetative, seed late summer. What's interesting about the fall rye, what I really like, it's a very competitive annual forage, and I always would suggest it because it actually acts as a biennial. And we've grown it at Lanigan, where we've seeded it. 6 weeks later, we've grazed it, and then we get a little bit of fall green up, or a little shot of moisture, and we get a little bit of a second rotation on that field, and the darn stuff will carry over and produce biomass the following spring, and where we can throw cow-calf pairs out on. So, you know, it really is very competitive. If you've got a green foxtail problem, suggest this either Prima or hazelnut fall rye. We are seeing now these hybrid fall rye coming at us, and these, in my mind, is a really great opportunity as well. And I know Bracetto's out there. We're doing some work on Bono right now and some small plot double cropping work. And I know there's other hybrid fall rye work going on at LFCE as a forage resource in backgrounding of feedlot diets. And so, you know, I think we need to look hard at maybe these fall ryes and see which one might work for you wherever you live. Winter wheats out there too, lower yields and oats, rapid regrowth, and of course the winter triticale is another option, and you know, very hardy. We're looking at Pica, which is the one variety of winter triticale, in our small plot work in comparison to the Bono hybrid fall rye. So, you know, there's your options: fall rye, winter wheat, winter triticale. Do your homework, do your research, talk to your you know, your ag reps or whomever to figure out which one's going to, you know, work the best for you. All right, a little bit about seeding date. I'm going to talk about seeding dates and potential yields of these annual forages, and then just kind of summarize some of the research that we've done over the years at Western Beef at Lanigan, Saskatchewan. So optimum, if you're going to fall seed, is that for the southern parts, is that, you know, first couple of weeks in September. If you're looking at that fall seed program to maybe get that spring growth of that winter cereal, in the north, they're suggesting maybe get it in a little bit earlier, August 15th to September 1. For a spring seed program, the more you delay the seeding date, obviously, the more you're going to see a reduction in forage yield. And so the difference between a May versus a June seeding, there's that 30-35% reduction. And this is just some work out of Lacombe, Alberta. I know it's not Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, or Tisdale, Saskatchewan, but you just get an indication of barley, oat, and triticale seeded in different seed dates in May and in June. And you can see the barley obviously did quite well with that early May seed date, and then just the reduction in yield as they went from May the 12th to June 21. It looks like maybe the oat did pretty good on that May 26th seeding date. And this is all dependent on moisture, folks, right? And so every farm is going to be a different case study. And, you know, there's oftentimes you'll put it in the ground and nothing will get no rain for 4 or 5 weeks. And then we hopefully will get that little bit of shot of moisture. We'll see it germinate and we'll see maybe 2-3 inches of growth. Or if we're lucky, we'll get a good rainfall and we'll see some adequate biomass. And so the triticale, you can see there, it's just showing too that it is producing on average a little more yield compared to your oat or your barley. And so, you know, realize if it's a spring seed program, the more you delay, it could be a less yield per acre. All right, and this is just some suggestions and seeding rates, okay, for barley, oat, triticale, wheat, and fall rye. And I've just put in brackets the bushel weight on each of these annual crops. And so you can see there's some rates or guidelines, folks. That's all they are. You know, you're going to make that executive decision on your farm or your ranch. I know we've always looked at, when we're doing barley or oat or triticale, in some of our research, we've gone that 2 bushels per acre, right? And so there's that range you can see for the different bushel weights of your different crops. And so it's up to you, but just certainly some guidelines to what may or may not work. And there's also the potential, and we've seen some producers do this, is a spring versus winter cereal mix too. And you can see some different seeding rates depending on where you live. Depth, it's an annual cereal, folks, and so it's not a perennial forage, and so probably anywhere between 3/4 to inch and a quarter, maybe 1.5 inches. You just want to maybe look at where is the moisture in your soil, firm, fine, and moist seed bed, and hopefully, you know, just calibrate and design to place that seed where that available moisture is. Knock on wood, and we have it. You know, the other thing too is we realize is that as crops mature, obviously we're going to see an increase in yield, right? We know that over time, but also we're going to see availability of energy and protein decline. And so just be aware that your timing of when you go out there and cut it or bale it or graze it, you may or may not be taking full advantage of that nutrient dense forage. You may be getting more yield per acre, but maybe a little lower quality. When to cut or graze is entirely up to you, folks. Performance varies with the soil zone. Brown and dark brown barley might out yield oat. Black gray wooded oat might, you know, out yield barley. And so, and then it depends if you're lucky enough to get those, you know, those 1/2 inch shots of rain will also help you. So as I said, oat, 6 to 8 weeks post-emergence, 7 to 8 inches in height, we can utilize it. The millets, I've always gone to that 20-30% heading when we're going to swath it or maybe graze it. The fall rye too, as I suggested, 6-7 weeks post-seeding at that particular height for grazing. This is just a seasonal distribution of the potential yield of all these different cool, warm winter cereals and the Italian ryegrasses. And you can see here that there's your winter cereal on the first one up there, the red line, and you can see that it is a fall seed of winter cereal. So there's going to give you that a pretty good biomass production early on if you fall seeded it. Next is your barley, right? And then follow that with your oat with the dotted line. And of course, there's your winter cereals that are spring seeded, right? So the blue line is the winter cereals spring seeded versus the red where they're fall seeded. And so that's just, and there's your Italian ryegrass, but that again needs a little bit more moisture. So there's your your potential ballpark, when is that biomass going to be available? And this is entirely up to you, whether you're grazing cow-calf pairs, breeding bulls, replacement heifers, weaned calves, whatever. And that's just a guideline, folks, and it all is dependent on rainfall. I just want to talk about 3 or 4 different studies and just give you a snapshot of some of the results that we've done over the years. And certainly we've looked at this millet, this golden German. It was very popular, right, several years ago, and we saw a lot of work done on it, a lot of work in Manitoba. It is a variety that came out of Colorado. Again, you need those pretty good growing conditions for golden German millet. It is a green crop, can be potential for prussic acid issues, so cyanogenic glycosides, and so be aware of that. And any of the golden German trials we did, we certainly went in there and controlled broadleaf weeds. There's just some suggested biomass yields. Why was it popular for that fall winter grazing is because it had that waxy cuticle and potentially could withhold its quality better than your barley or oat under that snow blanket. And so golden German, this is some work we did several years ago. It was a 45-acre field where we just put it in for a fall graze program, seeded June 17 at that seeding rate, controlled it for broadleaf weed pressure, and then we knocked her down late August at 20% heading. There you can see the yield, okay, about 1 3/4 ton per acre. Very good protein and pretty good energy for what? For a background in calves that we had out there, 185 head for 26 days. Now, I talked about the SO1 oat, and so I thought maybe as an opportunity to compare it to a cool season, as you know, compared to a warm season. And there's some work we did too at Lanigan, comparing the SO1 oat to the red Prozo millet. And on the left is your millet, on the right is your SO1 oat. And so, look, pretty good biomass, pretty good vegetative biomass. There's our yields at the end of the growing season, 3.5. Better than 3.5 for the oat compared to the millet, ton per acre. 36-acre field, we grew 18 acres of each, seeded June the 5th at seeding rate, 15 pounds acre for the millet and 64 for the oat. And you can see there's that 2 bushel per acre for that cool season cereal. And that provided 70 days of grazing for 100 cows. And so we look at the quality of those, the red Prozo sitting in that whole plant, 11% protein, 61% energy, and the CDC SO1 oat was sitting about 10% protein and 58% energy. So pretty good energy protein for cows at that stage of gestation. Here's another study we did looking at golden German millet and barley. Okay, fall graze program as well. 20 acres, seeded 17 pounds per acre, June 12th. This is Ranger barley. It's one of those older varieties on those 20 acres, and we put her in at 90 pounds per acre on the same seed date. And there you can see the difference in tonnage. The barley producing a little more biomass per acre compared to the millet, but proteins ranging from 12 to 13 and energy 52 to 58%. And we had 45 weight calves out on the barley for 90 days and 40 for 50 weight calves on that millet for 70 days. So just an opportunity to put some annual cereals in and background some calves. This is a really quite dated study, but just this was a fall rye study we did at Lanigan. Seeded it May 13th, bushel and a half the acre. In this case, we put on livestock manure on the field, right? We had a lot of excess pen manure and 170 acres cross fence into 4 different paddocks. And there we used it as a grasser program for those weights of cattle starting in that July time period. And so there's the average yield. It was about 2.5 ton per acre, and protein, very high protein with this fall rye, right? So you're seeing higher protein, maybe a little higher energy on your fall rye compared to your barley or your millet. And finally, we we looked at sod seeding. Can we find an old tired perennial pasture, knock it out with glyphosate, right? Suppress that existing sod and come in with the fall rye. And this was an August program where we used a piece of equipment called an agro plow with an inverted T-boot. And you can see it produced pretty good biomass in the fall of 09. And there's that annual ryegrass winter cereal acting like a biennial. And so you can see we got not only fall biomass for grazing, but we also got some spring grazing for cow-calf pairs. Very good quality and low fiber on that fall rye. So hence the reason I tend to lean towards fall rye compared to winter treated kale or winter wheat. So just to kind of wrap up my conversation here, what are some of the considerations we should think about? Well, first of all, let's pray for rain. That's the first thing we need to do. But be aware. Be aware of weed pressure in your annual crop. I know it's another bother, and I am talking, I think, next week about weeds or toxic plants in the AIM program. And weeds tend to be fairly good quality. Yes, they do, but they can have some anti-quality factors associated with them. Lamb's quarters is a known candidate for high nitrate, and that darn stinkweed, it has those glucosinolates, and it will produce that resin. And we had an issue with levels of stinkweed, or pennycress is the other common name, in our green feed bales fed to cows, and we had some real bad problems feeding it to cows. And so it might be prudent to think about what is your weed management program if we're going to grow those annual cereals. Of course, nitrates, you heard about that in an earlier webinar. Prussic acid, I already mentioned that for some of those green crops like the millets or maybe flax, and of course susceptibility to ergot. So, you know, if you're suspicious, take a feed test, send it to Prairie Diagnostic Service, just to feel confident going forward. And rethink some of these options I've talked about. You know, hopefully there might be one that tweaks your interest here this afternoon. Make sure it's adapted, and feed test. I can't say enough about that to know what level of energy protein you're looking at. You know, what is your plan? If I'm going to put it in, am I just going to, you know, not have another input cost with equipment on that acre of land? I'm just going to put my cattle out there and harvest with the animals. And when am I going to use it, right? Is it going to be early spring? If I'm fall seeding, is it going to be later on in the summer if I'm spring seeding? Or is it going to be a summer seed and I'm going to use it? You know, maybe you're thinking about putting something in from this day forward, right? August the 19th. Do we have time? Possibly. So given our forecast that we're looking at, maybe we're going to get our rainfall now, whatever it is. It's, as I said, 8 to 10 weeks too late. But is there an opportunity to maybe get some forage program late into that September, October time period? So just to summarize, what are you going to look at? The options that are out there are the cool seasons, the warm seasons, the winter cereals, or if it's a normal year, maybe those Italian ryegrasses. Rainfall challenges are just around the corner, and I think we've been in a 5-year below average. I don't think we can look at the 30-year average weather programs anymore. I think we have to look at the 5-10-year averages just to get an indication of what's coming at us every year. And to have a drought-proof program, it's just going to be in our back pocket. And what's that forage that's going to work for me to fit that window? Is it going to give me enough grazing, enough biomass for that June period, that July period, that August period, that September period? What class of livestock do I have? Grass or cattle out there? Am I trying to stretch it with cow-calf pairs? You know, what's the quality of these annual forages if my breeding program is in jeopardy, right? So, you know, you've got your cow to bull ratio on a breeding pasture, but the darn quality is terrible. It's going to impact your potential conception success. So, you know, be aware of the quality of that breeding pasture. So my final point, folks, is plan early, manage often, and feed test. So hopefully there's something in the conversation here this afternoon that might help you for sure. feel free to reach out to all your ag reps around those 10 regional offices in the province. And again, I'm not hard to find as well. So thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll have some conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Bart. That was a really great presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We did have some questions come in, but we had the audio, we had a glitch in the network here, I think, that caused a bit of a stall earlier on in your presentation, but I don't think it was too long. So hopefully if people do have questions around that, please type them in. But great presentation, Bart, and I'll run through the questions here right now. So the first one is about any comments on endophyte infections in ryegrass and prussic acid in sorghum.
Yeah, both. The sorghum issue can again be a problem. Prussic acid in the immature green crop that you're trying to grow and utilize. So again, probably wait for that correct maturity before you utilize. Endophyte problems on, sorry, was that ryegrass?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd have to suggest I'm not familiar with that. I know we deal with endophyte issues on our tall fescues, okay, or they do down in the southern U.S. varieties, but we don't have that issue with our tall fescue up here called Courtney tall fescue. But yeah, for sure, you know, your ryegrass is. We did see some challenges with some nitrate problems. So, you know, I mean, the issue with nitrates, and you heard this earlier, was that 0.5% nitrate is where you kind of, the red lights are going off. But it's all managing and monitoring and allowing that rumen to get adapted to that change in diet. And if you're concerned, dilute to 1/3. Maybe throw out some other forage out there to supplement to reduce that level of that anti-quality feed to 1/3 total diet.
Okay, great. And another question here for you, Bart, about sorghum being grown in the northwest region of Saskatchewan, and just comments on the feeding value of it, good or otherwise.
I guess I need to come clean. I have a little bit of experience with sorghum and sorghum Sudan grass. You know, to me, it's a warm season. To me, it needs those heat units. And so if you're getting that 26 to 30 to 32 degrees Celsius days, yes, it's probably going to produce. I did do some work with sorghum Sudan grass, a variety out of Manitoba, many, many years ago. I'd say 20 years ago. And it just did not perform at Lanigan, where on average we're getting 1,900 to 2,000 heat units. So I know these, and I've talked to folks in southern Alberta, and they are very comfortable with growing sorghum. And so, you know, some of these new varieties are very adapted, but if you get those warm days in that July, August time period, and that's where your warm seasons are going to produce, that late July, August time period, then for sure, I think sorghum's going to fit that program.
Great. And the next question, would triticale be better accepted by cattle if grazed in a polycrop, or do you think they would selectively graze around it?
Really good question. You know, we didn't see any issues with triticale in a swath graze program, or I believe we grew it for backgrounding diets as well. You know, but absolutely. I mean, you know, if you're putting it into a polycrop blend, for sure, you know, you've got the other functional groups in there. It may not be as big of a problem as we're seeing. I think some of the intake challenges we've seen, maybe it is as a silage program over the years, maybe some of those earlier varieties, but we didn't see any problems with the TASA in the work we've done.
Okay, perfect. The next question, is there any significant difference in the seed cost of annual ryegrass compared to our more common annuals like barley or oats?
That's a good question, and I apologize, I'm not really up on my price of seed per pound, but I would suggest that, yeah, you're probably going to pay a little bit more for your Maris Ledger compared to your, your oat, your baler forage oat, for example, or some of those oat or barley on a price per bushel for sure. Availability, right? So it's all about demand, right? So obviously those oat and barley may be a lower price per pound compared to some of those alternate crops like your annual ryegrass. So it probably is a little higher price per pound.
Okay, and the next question here is on prussic acid. Heard that it might be able to cook off if it got hot enough. Any thoughts on that?
I have not heard that, and I would just say buyer beware. Test, it's a prussic acid, and when it hits the room and it produces hydrogen cyanide gas. So yeah, it tends to be a problem in green, immature, either millet or flax crops. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying it cooks off, but I mean, probably my suggestion is wait till later stage of maturity.
Okay. And the next question here, any considerations that need to be kept in mind for producers looking to graze written off canola fields or canola stubble this fall? I know it's a little bit off topic, but just a question that come in.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and myself and a lot of other specialists have been responding to a lot of canola crop questions. And I've done a bunch of articles in Western Producer and Cattleman on this topic. So, in my mind, it is work as an alternate forage. Yes, it does. It tends to be a little different compared to your oat or your barley, because with that hollow stem, it tends to take a little longer to dry down. If you're going to roll it up as green feed, you might want to run it through a mower conditioner, or as a silage crop, macerate the stem. The one thing I say is beware. Canola tends to have a very high sulfur level, and about that 0.5 to 1.3%. And so we don't want to go over 0.4% total diet sulfur. So if it is your basal forage in your diet, whether it's a silage or a green feed or a graze, it tends to be higher sulfur, which can have an issue in terms of trace mineral absorption, copper, zinc, and manganese. And so again, if you're going to use canola as a hay or a silage source, dilute it to 1/3 total diet. But it is being utilized as a salvage crop in many areas this summer and this fall.
Great. The next question, Bart, about what fertility rates were used with the winter cereals there, and any recommendation to help avoid high nitrates?
We soil tested. It was a very long established crested wheatgrass pasture that we sod seeded into with the fall rye and that one study. And we didn't go over 50 pounds of N. I'll say bluntly that all those annual cereals I talked about are members of the Gramineaceae family. And so grasses love N. So figure out what your levels are. If it's 10 available, 20 available in the soil, go up to that 50 pounds. I've never had an issue with high nitrates. If I just was prudent, I wouldn't go out there dumping on 100 or 150 pounds of N. It's moderate, management options that are out there. So.
Okay, good stuff. And while we continue on with the questions here, I'm just going to post a survey in the chat box there for everyone if you do have to get going to another appointment here for 1 o'clock. But the next question we had, Bart, was about fall seeded fall rye. Can you graze it in the spring and then silage it later on in the summer?
I would feel very comfortable that, knock on wood, if we get adequate spring moisture or a fairly good snow cover, for sure. And in a normal year or even a 75% of adequate rainfall year, your fall rye, you read all literature on it and all the research on it, it is going to come back. And so, you know, I would feel that, yeah, you could get in there and give it a quick rotation with your cattle, and then knock on wood, you're going to get those timely late May, June rains that we didn't get in 2021 in most parts. You could probably have some second regrowth that could be managed for sure.
Okay, a few more questions here for you, Bart. The first one being, what would you recommend for a seeding rate for fall rye sod seeding into an area with some foxtail problems? And they're just looking to plan to graze it in the spring.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we went with that. You got the foxtail problem in there, right? So yeah, that tells me you probably got some saline problems too as well. You know, we went with that 20-25 pounds per acre in that sod seed program of ours. So yes, you know, maybe you might go just 5 pounds heavier or something like that, just because you know there's going to be competition with existing darned old foxtail, so, and even the salinity issues.
Okay, for sure. And last question that I have here, unless anyone does have some burning questions, feel free to type them into the chat box or question box here. Any comments on kochia for green feed bales or for silage baling?
Yeah, those are the two. Great question again. The two that we're getting a lot is using canola as a salvage crop and kochia. And the so it's the annual kochia weed that's out there, and certainly we've looked at it many years ago as a forage resource. It can be fairly moderate quality, so yeah, it can be an option, but I do warn, it has again some darn anti-quality constituent known as oxalates, and oxalates tend to tie up calcium absorption. And so again, our suggestion is, if you're going to use it as a green feed, or roll it up as a slew hay or as a ditch hay, for sure dilute it down to that 1/3 total diet.
Great. Thank you, Bart.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions coming here at this point in time. So just thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us here today for this webinar on spring forages, and especially you, Bart, for putting this presentation together. I really appreciate it. Like Bart said, you can reach out to your local agriculture office, or else look up Bart directly for any questions that you may have from this presentation here as well. The survey link is in the chat box there, so if you do have a moment, please go ahead and fill that out, as it helps us plan future events. And we look forward to you hopefully joining us on our next webinar, which is Alternative Feeds with John McKinnon on August 24th. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.